Welcome to the CHASS section. I'm so glad that everybody can join us today. We have a panel of wonderful CHASS alumni who are out and about in their professional careers, and I'm really excited to introduce everybody today. My name is Colin Beamer. I work in student leadership and engagement at NC State University, and we were inside Tally Student Union for those who are familiar. And I'm also joined today by Mallory LaRusso. Mallory, would you care to introduce yourself and tell us what your role is?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Mallory LaRusso, and I'm currently a senior at NC State studying statistics, and I'm the ambassador coordinator for the Student Leadership and Engagement Office.
Awesome. Thank you, Mallory. And as I mentioned, we are joined by a wonderful panel of professionals in their careers. So I'm going to kick it over first to Margaret Thurston. Margaret, would you mind introducing yourself and telling us a couple quick things? I have a couple quick starter questions for us. If you could share your name, what was your major while you were at NC State? And then what your current occupation is, if you can tell us that as well.
Sure. So my name is Margaret Thurston. One thing that I do want to call out is I didn't go to NC State, so a little curveball there. I actually went to Florida State and I studied hospitality management. I currently am a program lead at Allegis Global Solutions, which most people don't really know exactly what that company is, but the general gist of what I do is I kind of work in the operations side of staffing. And so we're part of a managed service provider, and my current, and we manage the contingent labor process. It's a very convoluted way of explaining things. Always happy to talk about it if anybody wants to. But the current account that I support is Facebook.
Awesome.
I think that was it. Was there anything else that you wanted me to cover there?
Nope, that'll start us off, and we'll have some more awesome questions for y'all later. So thank you, Margaret. And I should mention, thank you for catching that, because yes, alumni and friends of NC State. So not just alumni here. So thank you. All right, I'll pass it over to Susie. Susie, would you mind introducing yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Colin. So my name is Susie Bishop, and I was a communications media major at NC State. And I'm currently still in Raleigh, and I'm the Director of Product Development at the Center for Leadership Studies. So we do leadership and management training.
Awesome. Thank you, Susie. All right, I'll pass it over now to Ryan. Ryan, would you mind kicking us off as well?
Hey, I'm Ryan Britton. I actually am about to start a job as an area manager at Amazon. I start next month, and I'll be moving to Kernersville, North Carolina. But I graduated last May from NC State with a major in political science and a minor in criminology.
So. All right. Thank you, Ryan. I grew up near Kernersville, so I hope you like it over there. Awesome. And then I'll now pass it to Caitlin. Caitlin, would you mind introducing yourself?
Hi, I'm Caitlin Kim. I am coming to you guys from up in Washington, D.C. I graduated from NC State in 2016 with a degree in business administration and a degree in international studies with a minor in Spanish. I was able to double major, minor, study abroad, all that jazz as a Alexander Hamilton scholar. Seth Murray was my advisor. I believe he was still there. He's the sole reason I was able to graduate in 4 years with all of that. I currently work for the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, NGA. It's quite the mouthful. We are a combat support agency within the Department of Defense and an intel agency within the intelligence community. So we're dual-hatted in that we report to the Secretary of Defense and the Director of National Intelligence. My current role is a Foundation Geoint Officer, which it's a fancy term for a program manager. I manage large government contracts that buy geospatial data, and I used to be a geospatial analyst before my current business role. So I'm happy to take any questions for those of you that are interested in a career with the federal government.
Oh, awesome. Thank you, Caitlin, for introducing yourself as well. I'll pass it over now to Anna. Anna, would you mind introducing yourself?
Yeah. Hey, everybody. I'm Anna Watson. I am coming to you today from Northwest Arkansas. I graduated in 2014 from the University of Arkansas with a major in communication, minor in political science. My career in education took a wild turn, and I ended up studying urban planning at Georgetown University, which is where I met Marcy's daughter, Kaylin, became great friends. And I'm currently the director of the Arts and Culture Department in a city in Northwest Arkansas, city of Rogers. So yeah, happy to be here.
Thanks, Anna. I appreciate it. All right, and then Kristen, would you mind introducing yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Colin. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I am an NC State alum. I actually went to NC State for graduate school. So I'm a graduate school alum, got my master's PhD in industrial organizational psychology at NC State. I'm now living in Cary, North Carolina, just next door, and kind of spent half my career doing organizational development, wide-scale change transformation, change management, leadership development, and spent half my career as a business executive, kind of driving market strategy and kind of change and transformation from that seat. I'm currently working for Parexel. It's a clinical research company with dual headquarters in Boston, Massachusetts and Durham, North Carolina. And I head up their Center of Excellence for Change and Transformation. So
Excellent.
happy to be with you guys this afternoon.
Yes, we're very happy to have you as well. So, all right, well, I'm going to get us kicked off, and I want to just do some quick housekeeping as well for those who joined us a little bit later. Feel free to drop questions in the Q&A that you all have for all of our panelists today. We're also going to ask questions ourselves, so some of those questions may be answered along the way for you, but definitely feel free to drop questions in there. But I'm going to get us kicked off with some questions to keep us moving. And I'm going to call on a couple folks at a time so that you all can answer. But I also want to invite our panelists, if you hear a super interesting question that you want to contribute to, feel free to, even if you don't get called on in the first place. So, but I'm going to kick us off, and I'm going to ask for first Margaret and then for Ryan to answer this question, if you all don't mind. What is the best piece of advice for you all reaching your career goals? And Ryan, I know that you also just are getting started, but feel free to take that any direction, perhaps part of the interview process or what you were focusing on as you were leaving college for your career goals.
Okay, I'm unmuted now. Okay, great. So yeah, I actually do love this question because having been out of college for 5 years now, I'm still identifying kind of what my career path looks like. It's still, I don't have a defined set stage quite yet. So really for me, it's like capitalizing on what you're going through right now. Like every challenge and every like feeling of being overwhelmed in like a new space and a new job and whatever that looks like for you, you can understand like, okay, take a moment to identify, okay, what am I learning from this and what can I take away? And then utilize that as like your weapon for future progression kind of thing. Like these moments that they're types of things that you can talk to in interviews, and like you can really like take anything that you're being challenged with as okay, how you overcame that, and it helps develop, you know, where you're going to go to. So that's really one thing that helps you tap into identifying your strengths and then how you respond in moments of adversity. So ultimately, if you kind of have a goal that you're already striving towards, what my advice to you would be, and what I'm still working on as I identify what that looks like for me, is understanding, okay, big picture, like this is where I want to go. What kind of skill sets do I need to get there? And then kind of back your way into that. Okay, how can I create and cultivate that type of environment and create those opportunities in what I'm currently doing? And then just really honing in on that so you can get yourself better prepared for what you're targeting.
Awesome. Thank you. Well said. All right, Ryan, your turn.
I definitely agree with Margaret. I kind of had wrote down like always be prepared because you never know when an opportunity will present itself. And so kind of with my experience, I came into college not really knowing what I wanted to do. I had a general idea. My dad was in federal probation, and I thought career in law enforcement or those types of opportunities would be what I wanted to do. I just really wanted to make a difference in people's lives. And coming into NC State, I didn't really do a great job of getting involved in first, but more and more opportunities started to present themselves. And I actually got involved with the NC State baseball team as a student manager and did some work with them. And then from there, I got an internship because of the work I had done with them, and just being prepared to do different types of things and open to different opportunities. You never know where you'll end up because, in all honesty, baseball has nothing to do with political science or CHASS or anything, but being open to those opportunities led me to other connections. And then obviously Amazon is not necessarily political science, but making those connections and being well-rounded and not cutting yourself off from something just because it may not be a direct correlation. There's no direct line to what your dreams are. So just do what you think can do to get you where you want to be. And with all your failures, you learn from them, and those experiences can lead to your ultimate success. So just overcoming that adversity is a big deal as well. So.
Well said. Yeah. I did another panel recently where we were talking about networking in particular among young alumni from NC State. And that was one of the core lessons I heard from everybody was like networking is anywhere and everywhere. It's formal and it's informal. It doesn't look like just one thing. And so holding onto those networks is super important. So thank you, Ryan. Appreciate that. The next question I'm going to ask for Caitlin and Anna to answer, if you all don't mind. Caitlin, there's also a question in the Q&A for you specifically too, so feel free to use some of that time to answer that question. But the next question is, what do you wish you had done differently in college, if anything, or if not, tell us a little bit about some of the things that you did in college that you thought were helpful.
I can go ahead and answer the question in the chat first, and then I'll answer your question, Colin. I got my job because I interned with NGA between my junior and senior year of college, and then I received a job offer my senior year of college, and that was awesome because I know sometimes it takes a really long time to get your security clearance in place, so I was able to do that while in undergrad. And then to answer your question, Colin, about what I wish I had done differently, now, I mean, I had a really happy college experience, but now where I am today, looking back, I wish I'd taken better care of my mental and physical health. I think college is such a rare environment where you're completely surrounded by your peers and you're all competing for the same thing. You're in the same life stage. So just kind of take a step back and evaluate where you want to go next, and remember to call your mom, call your dad, and get into a fitness routine if you can.
Awesome. Thank you, Caitlin.
Okay, I'll hop in here. That's so important, Caitlin, and I'm really, really glad that you mentioned that, because I feel like in college especially, it's a time where we can kind of get caught up in the day-to-day, and it's easy to lose sight, and it's really, really the foundation that you work from moving forward. As far as what I would have done differently, so I think when I was in college, I held on to a lot of limiting beliefs, felt like things were out of my reach and just wrote them off. Like wasn't going to be smart enough, wasn't going to be professional enough, wasn't going to get where I wanted to go. And part of me accepted that. And then when I got into the workforce, I realized that it was all kind of just in my head, right? And like we are all capable of pushing ourselves and achieving things that surprise ourselves. That starts in the small stuff and it builds and grows gradually, but ultimately letting that go and believing in yourself and taking steps out of your comfort zone is really important for your professional development as well as your personal development. Yeah, I don't know. It's really easy to think, oh, I could never achieve that. That's totally out of the question, but it's really not. It's really not. So that'd be my biggest redo piece of advice.
Awesome. Anybody else care to respond? I see some folks.
Yeah, Colin, I just wanted to jump in on that because I think that's a really important what both Caitlin and Anna just said is I think what's really hard is when you're younger and you're just 18 embarking into college and time just seems like everything just seems so massively important at that point in time. And then as time goes on, you realize that, hey, career goals, I mean, are important to have those, but really if you think about it as stepping stones, like you're putting a stone in front of you and you don't necessarily have to know exactly where you're headed through the forest, but you just know you want to take this trail and you might decide to go down to the waterfall, you might decide to go up to the mountain peak. But I think that's probably the biggest lesson that I have reflecting back is that just to kind of be a bit less stressed about that goal and where I'm trying to achieve and instead just sort of take in what's happening in the moment a bit more. And I think it's so hard to do that, but that's kind of my biggest piece of advice.
Awesome.
I wish I had done differently.
Yes, I also echo that. Yeah, it's really easy to like look out and think, oh, I'll know everything. I'll have my career path perfectly lined out by the time I'm 30. I'm almost 30 right now. No one knows what they're doing. Just do your best. So, yeah.
Susie, do you want to respond as well?
Yeah, just again, I think this is a big one and one that we can all relate to, but something I wish I had done was just get out of my comfort zone and like get out of my own way. I want to come across as I have it together and I'm working towards XYZ and people like perceiving me a certain way that it's like I found my group and my things that I was good at and just tried to excel in those areas so I could look even better in those ways. But if I could go back, I would diversify my experiences so much more and try to learn from the things that I wasn't good at and grow in those areas. Like there's something that comes with being uncomfortable that allows you to grow that I wasn't really willing to step into that at that time. And looking back, I wish I had.
Awesome. For our panelists, or for our attendees rather, if you see people nodding their heads, it sounds like these are very common experiences for our career professionals. So definitely something to note as well. Are there, forgive my lack of remembering here, for those who did have communications related majors, is there anybody who would be willing to answer this question here, or anybody at all who might have some advice for Twinkle's question in here? In the Q&A. So the question is, for comm majors, what are the different career paths you considered when majoring in comm? I feel like the major is pretty vague, so it can't be applied to a specific job or internship. So does anybody care to talk about that, even if you're not a comm major, honestly?
I can speak to it a little bit. I think it is broad, which I think is the beauty in it. I was communications media, and senior year went to like local news stations, more like journalism type internships. And my senior year, I had this moment like, oh my gosh, this is not what I want to do. Like, now what? And then I started interning for a pharmaceutical company in their communications department. And I was like, I love this. I love like this organization wide. I kind of felt like I was connected to all these different departments. And now I transitioned into marketing for the Center for Leadership Studies. So the company I'm at now, and learned a lot of the marketing department and external communications. Now I'm with the same company, but I'm on the product side, and it's a lot more leadership based and internal and like working on the physical product. So I agree, it is vague, but like part of that is like what I love about it. There's so many different places that you can plug in.
Yeah, really well said. I felt the same way about political science as well. Like my role, I'm working in higher ed right now, and never would have really seen myself as a political science major ending up in higher ed. And yet I'm in an office where my political science degree ended up being very helpful in a lot of ways that I didn't expect. So does anybody else care to comment on that question?
I have something, so like just in supplement to Susie's comment. So I was not a communications major, but I think it becomes overwhelming when we start looking like, okay, we've tried to fine tune what we're searching for based on identifying a major. But when I was in college, I had no idea what I wanted to do. That I was an exploratory major, which was just like taking science classes, taking marketing classes. And they were like, okay, you're not going to graduate if you don't pick a major. So I finally did. I'm like, okay, I'll just land on something because I can't pass this finance class. So hospitality sounds fine. And then I ended up transitioning, and I'm like, well, I don't know what I'm looking for in a job yet. So how do I know what to apply to? And ultimately what ended up happening is I just would go to career fairs and find, okay, who did I enjoy talking to? I didn't even care what the company was. And it was like, who can I find like the right culture fit? And I thought, so once I got a job offer, I didn't know if that's what I wanted to do. And I identified a year and a half into it that was so not what I wanted to do. But it was just like, okay, how to make the pool a little bit smaller. And I am like, my major is related to what I'm doing because I work with people, but like I am now completely derailing off of what the traditional trajectory would be for somebody that's in a hospitality type of role. So that's where it's like, it's so, no matter what direction you initially started out in, it's likely going to change. So identifying like where to start is probably challenging because it can be so overwhelming. So just like, I think almost building a network of talking to people about what they're doing or what they enjoy or understanding what exists out there has been like helpful for me. And, and that's kind of what I think we're all here for, is just, I think if I can speak for everybody, everybody was pretty confused or is confused. I'm still confused on where I'm, ultimately headed, but you start making sense as you progress. So just to go out.
It really is an evolution. So one thing I'll just say is I majored in history and German as an undergrad, did not take one psychology course, but because I studied abroad in Germany and I sat in this lecture where they started talking about when they reunified Germany and all the challenges they had with mindset and trying to bring two different parts of that were once a country back together again, where people kind of lived under these different types of government and change their mindset. And how do you do that? And you have to motivate people differently and get them to come together, and the whole cultural aspects to it. I realized that there was this whole other field that studied organizational psychology and how all of this comes together and the roots of human work behavior. And I didn't take any psychology. So I took a couple psychology courses, the bare minimum to apply to grad school. But I think it truly is an evolution. And I think we can get so overwhelmed and so wound up on what's my major going to be, and that's going to define me for the rest of my life. And that's not really it, because when it comes down to it, yes, I use a lot of what I learned in grad school sometimes in my job, but sometimes I don't. I think what's most important is the building relationships, the critical thinking, some of these things that you learn going to having that college experience and really trying to, learn how to learn as much as how to learn from others. And I think those are the types of things that the more that we focus on what we're learning, that evolution starts to flow a bit more effortlessly than when we are trying to kind of make sense of every little thing that we're doing. Then we get all kind of worked up about it.
Yeah, those are some really great thoughts too. And the next question actually is related to a lot of some of the themes that y'all are talking about, and it's also included sort of in this question from Hagar as well, about how do you stand out in general. And so the next question being, as a recent graduate, or anybody for that matter in marketing or who is networking rather, how can you make yourself stand out among competition without going overboard, or just in general, how do you make yourself stand out? What types of things are people looking for in your experiences? And let's start with Susie, and then Kristen, and then anybody else who wants to jump in.
Yeah, I think, you can be overwhelmed going into an interview just thinking like, how can I impress them? And like, what can I say? And how am I going to stand up against the competition? But you don't know them. You don't fully know their organization. You also don't know who else is interviewing. So I think the best thing you can do is know your story and confidently put that across, be authentic. And both sides will know if it's a match. And I think if you know your story and what you've done, the impact it had, the results, and you can clearly communicate that, that's all you can do.
Yeah, I think well said, Susie. I was going to say almost the exact same thing, but just to kind of reiterate a couple points is, what I do a lot of professional development workshops, and what I always tell people is getting clear on your value. Like ultimately, what do you bring to the table, and have some examples of that, and talk very authentically and have some examples on how you actually made some contributions and impact on others, whether it's even personal examples as well as much work examples, because at the end of the day, it is about, is there a fit? And you're interviewing them as much as they're interviewing you. And so it's not so much about, obviously you read job descriptions, some of the things they might be looking for. So obviously you want to think about from there, is there a fit, and what kinds of things can I mention that line up to maybe what they're looking for? So I don't leave anything off the table, but ultimately it's really kind of sharing, what are your strengths? What do you like to be challenged with? And don't be shy to kind of talk about also maybe a challenge that you had where you did struggle and how you came out of it. Because at the end of the day, I'm actually in the process right now of interviewing some people for a position, and I'm just trying to also figure out, what inspires them, what makes them tick, how do they handle difficulty as much as how they handle success, I think are both important. So talk authentically, and don't be, shy to kind of be a little bit vulnerable about some things too, because that kind of helps if they really, if they don't really have an understanding of that, then maybe that's not a place that you'll ultimately feel comfortable with.
Yeah, those are all really great points. I also like to remind people in the search committees and interviews and things that I've done even in my short career, a lot of times when you make it to that interview, you already check the boxes for the basic requirements. So now is the time where you're presenting who you are as a person, to make sure that that's the type of person that they're looking for in the role. Do you fit well with the team? So presenting yourself authentically is such a great core piece of advice to that, so that you can just rest on that when you're in that interview stage or when you are creating those connections. It just really helps build those bridges in ways that are going to serve you well, I guess, in your career. So really great responses, y'all, on that. Anybody else?
And I was just going to add one more thing is also don't feel like if you go into an interview and you come out of it and you just really didn't like the vibe for some reason. I mean, you can get the vibe from places sometimes, even just sitting, like, I know we're in the middle of a pandemic, so we're not really necessarily going in person, but when you go into person in some places and you're sitting in the waiting room and they're running late and they're harried, or, I mean, you can kind of understand a little bit of the vibe of different places too. And if it's, at the end of the day, if it's not for you, even if they offer you the role, kind of pay attention to asking yourself, is this what I want? Am I going to be happy? Because you don't want to commit to something and then be miserable for the next year or so.
Yeah, well said. There's a great question in the Q&A right now about mentorship. And I want to start with Ryan and Margaret, if y'all are willing to answer this question in that order. How do you find a mentor? Talk about some of your mentors and your experiences, whether they're in college or elsewhere. What did that mean to you? And then how did you build that relationship?
Yeah, so mentors obviously play a huge role in your self-development, as well as like making connections and figuring out what you want in your life. And for me, I kind of went about that and looking at my hometown community and some of the things that some people that I thought lived lives that I could see myself living, where they had free time, they were able to give back to the community, they felt like they enjoyed their job, enjoyed people and being a part of the community and just giving back in a way, while also spending time with their family and being able to do volunteer work and those kinds of things. So I kind of looked at those people and saw the roles they were in and asked them how they got where they were, what they liked about their job, what they didn't like about their job, if they could change something, what they would do, if they were in my situation, their advice, and if they could go back and do it all over again, would they do it the exact same way? And in all honesty, I think even just having those conversations, if that you didn't have them as like a mentor before, they feel connected to you in a way, and you learn so much from them while they also learn from you. And it's just a great way for you to meet people, but also know what you want and what you value when you're looking for jobs. And so for like myself, I looked at an insurance agent. There was a State Farm insurance agent in town, and I saw he was giving back to the community all the time and felt like he had a lot of free time. He would go for runs on the weekend or different trips. And I was like, that seems like a really good job. And so I went and talked to him about his experiences and how he got where he was. And it kind of, even though he didn't ever expect to be where he was then, it gave me a sense of what I wanted in my life and what I looked for in a job and those kind of things. So.
Awesome. Yeah. So to kind of trail off that, I have a few different thoughts on like mentorship. So my first is I'm somebody that's like very impacted by like the words that I read, and it like changes kind of my outlook on things and how, so I've almost developed like mentorship type relationships with people that don't even realize that they're mentoring me, right? Where it's like I'm, reading this poetry and different like things like that, their outreach to their community, that it isn't like a one-on-one thing with me, but I grow so much from that. So I have like that one take that I lean a lot in that category to help my own self-development and identify. It's more of like a personal thing, like how to keep my mental space in a good space. And from that, I know that I can continue like staying on top of my career growth and trajectory for that. But then as far as like an actual person to lean on, I've never really like sought out an individual like to be like, okay, hey, can you be my mentor? They're definitely like very organic and things of like, hey, this is who I lean on to. And a lot of times it's really, I found that in the workplace once I was in a healthy work environment. I definitely, like, coming from toxic workplaces, it was hard to identify what that would look like or how to exist in those spaces. But transitioning over to a team where I was able to go through things personally and not feel like, well, I can't let them know because I don't want them to think I'm weak or, whatever. I've always also probably overshared a lot of stuff in my life, but like I was able to talk very candidly about what I'm experiencing and have people that had my back, and that kind of automatically created a lot of those relationships. And so, like, to your question of, what's crossing the line, I think, yeah, it's important to, hey, you're hired on to do a job. It's important that gets done and define keeping that as your goal. But like, I think our life and our health and all of that comes first to me, like before any kind of job. And so having people that care about what's going on outside of the walls of work is really important. And I think that's really how you identify a mentor, almost, or they organically fall into that place, because hey, yeah, I care what our business goals are, but I also care what's happening in your home. And, and so that's kind of where I found mine, and they happen to be managers or even coworkers.
Awesome. Thank you all. Caitlin, did you have a response as well?
Oh, I was just going to add, my first few years out of college, I actually had two different mentors. One was a more formal relationship with someone who was pretty high up, and they were more of a career-oriented mentor. And then I also had a separate mentor outside of my immediate office that was more of a friend, if you will. And we established up front, like, this is informal, off the record. And so I remember an occasion where I despised my first supervisor at the time, and we were having this conflict. So I went to her office, shut the door, cried it out, composed myself, went back. No one ever knew what happened. And I just needed that. So I think there's, different relationships with different mentors. And I know you guys aren't in the workforce yet. So in college, I would say my mentors were some of my professors that I would go to their office hours, email, call, and build on that relationship.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Pivoting a little bit here, I have a more specific question, and it's perfect because Caitlin and Anna, I would like for you both to answer this if you're willing. And Sophie asked in the Q&A, what are the best ways to cultivate the necessary skills to work in policy and government? And then also there's a section of Hagar's question from earlier as well, talking about how to find good opportunities as well. So maybe you all could sort of touch on both of those things if you can.
I can start. I will say that almost everything I learned for my job was on the job training or certifications or classes, training, whatever, through work. And my schoolwork as an undergrad was more kind of creating me into this well-rounded person to be a productive employee. And I know applying to government is a black hole. And so you're not sure exactly what they're looking for. But I would just try to hone in on your unique experiences. Even if you think, oh, I studied abroad in Egypt, that's not that unique, but putting that on your resume, you don't know whose area of interest that is, who reads your resume and they're like, oh, I like this person because they have this experience. So just try to highlight your experiences. Even if you don't think they're unique, you'll be surprised what grabs people's attention. So any languages or senior thesis projects, put that on there because it'll grab their attention.
Absolutely. Echo all of that. I would say too, working for city government the way that I do with a planning background, it's interesting because it's almost as much technical knowledge as it is understanding people, understanding how a message needs to be delivered for the public, which honestly communication really lends itself well to that. Yeah, Caitlin hit the nail on the head with her response.
Awesome. Does anybody else have any other things to add for that question? I know that one's more specific, but cool. Well, the next question that I have, and I'll start with Susie and Kristen again, if y'all are willing to kick us off, is what's your best tip for transitioning from college to career? That's an ever-present question for our college students.
My truly like raw answer is just to have an open mind. And, you know, as we were kind of like reflecting about some of these questions, I was just thinking of my 21-year-old self. And I just remember senior year, I was over my roommates. I was ready to graduate. I couldn't wait to work and like prove myself. But that's not where everyone is at. And I don't know, I remember like walking into or coming into the workforce and thinking like everyone's going to be really driven. Everyone's here to do XYZ. We're all on the same page. Like everyone every day is ready to just like give it their best. And you kind of were like, wow, this person's going through this. This is going on. There's a wide spectrum of ages. And you just like start realizing like, no, we're not all on the same page. Like not everyone's this like ambitious 21-year-old girl like ready to take it on. And it just like hit me really quickly like how much I had to learn and take in. And if I would have just had a more open mindset and just been ready to learn, which I was ready to learn, but just I was more open and didn't have this like set mindset of like what work was going to be, I think it would have been much easier for me to transition. So that's what it is for me.
Yeah, I think I don't see your thoughts. One of the things that I recognize too is like when you're in college, is like everybody's life is pretty similar, and then you leave and you go into the you graduate, go into the workforce, and then yeah, in some ways everybody's life is similar in that the majority of us work from 9 to 5 or whatever that might look like, but you quickly realize that you're in this world where everybody has a lot of different needs and goals. And probably the most important thing to me was developing relationships across a wide spectrum and diverse set of people. And even though I had a lot of diversity kind of in all tense of what that means in college, one thing that struck me is when I started working, and I worked for a couple of years before I went to grad school, one of the people that I was actually developed a nice friendship with was a woman that was my mother's age. And it was kind of funny because like, she and I just bonded. We go for walks at, over lunch break because I didn't want to sit by my desk, and she was kind of an outdoors person too. And so I think what surprised me is just that you really make connections with even a wider array of types of people at work. And you have to, just as much as, you want to, that's kind of a new environment for a lot of us. At the same time, just kind of, relaxing and really trying to get to know people and not just being focused on the task, but really trying to be much more focused on the people around you. And that's probably one of the biggest things that will help you, and similar a lot to what Susie just said as well.
Awesome. Ryan, you're going through this process at this very moment. Well, do you have any thoughts like on what this looks like for you as you've experienced this in real time?
Yeah, definitely. I definitely agree with Kristen and Susie there. And just basically being comfortable with those around you. Like, you may not have anything in common right off the bat, but the more and more you talk to people, the more connections and things you find you have in common. And just being willing to be open and allow people to tell you their story, and you'll just feel connected to them more. And just working as a team, those kinds of things give you so much more than you could ever realize. I mean, I've worked with some people at my high school job that I still stay connected with just because we took the time to have conversations and talk about their dreams and aspirations and what they wanted in life. And it just makes you realize some things maybe you didn't even notice about yourself and what you want. And I just think that almost sometimes is more than even just the job you're doing day to day.
And Colin, if I can jump in here too, because this is one of those things that I wish I would have understood when I was getting into the workforce. It's less of what it has to do with like your career, but more so like taking care of yourself. I didn't know what like creating a routine with myself like that, or having something that I was consistently doing to keep myself grounded, or there are certain things that are just like very little acts, but making sure that you're able to do that, because like you're going to be stressed, you're going to be overwhelmed, there's going to be a lot that's going on, and I don't think you ever reach a point in your life where that just stops. So it's like you have to set the foundation and the tone from the beginning. And I struggle with that intensely. Like I left college and I moved somewhere that I didn't know anybody, but I was like, oh, this will be great. I had a great college experience. I was ready for something new. And I ended up getting into a job that I didn't particularly love. I was very devoted to like, okay, always giving it my all. But I was definitely neglecting a lot of like my taking care of my mental health. And it was a lot. What I've learned throughout the years is like, hey, I want to wake up every morning and, you know, not like being strict on a routine, but I'm like, okay, I'm going to read this, whatever affirmation that I want to do and stretch each morning, like whatever that looks like. But like setting that completely shifted how I show up to work each day, because, and that was, it took me years to figure that out. And I just want to call out whatever that looks like for you, however you want to get that set up. Like it's important to pay attention to that, because you know, you only have one of you, and who you bring to work, like that shows through, you know, any of the stuff you're dealing with at home, that's going to show up in work. So take care of yourself. It's really important.
Awesome. I totally agree. Gosh, the experiences that I had as well. It's just like going from student to professional staff. In any role, frankly, if you're not taking care of yourself, it's going to be all the more challenging, because everything is new. Like everything you're doing, you're having to learn on the fly. Nobody trained, like somebody mentioned earlier, like where did you learn how to do your job? So much of it's on the job training, versus like you will learn things in college, of course, that will apply. But in my experience, like so much of it was just learning all the time for the first year in my role before I felt totally comfortable with everything. And everybody's different, but that was my experience. So totally agree with like, got to take care of yourself. And then
Yeah, Colin, if I could, I just want to highlight, it really does take about, I mean, a year before you feel really confident in your role and you understand what's expected of you and what's going on. So don't be too hard on yourself, because you're learning, and people around you know that. And so if it's your first gig, just make sure you're taking care of yourself and you're not putting too much expectation on your performance. Because at the end of the day, like we're people, right? We're not at the spreadsheet. So make sure you're putting yourself first.
I wish somebody had told me that right there, Anna. It's like, give yourself that grace as you're coming into a new role, especially as you're leaving college, because first job out of college, I think everybody thinks, I need to know everything. And guess what, folks? You don't know everything. When you get into that first job, there's so much you're going to be learning. So that open-mindedness and that grace that you're going to give yourself to try things, mess up, it's all part of it.
Ask for help. Yeah.
Ask for help.
Well, and the key thing too is you don't ever stop learning. Like really focus on that, because I think a lot of people think that, you know, at some point I'm supposed to be perfect, I'm supposed to know everything, and take that off. No, you're not. You're always constantly learning, and in that way, and you're, you know, focus on also trying to learn from other people too, and that definitely takes some of the pressure off as well too.
Absolutely. Your colleagues and your supervisor and all those people, if they're doing their jobs well, they want to help you because it helps them to help you. So all of those things. Yes, this is the real stuff they don't tell you in college. Any other thoughts on that question before we move on? I know we're getting sort of close on time, so definitely want to make sure we get a few more in here. Awesome. Okay, so one question that I saw in the chat or in the Q&A as well that I really liked was, how do you all maintain that network or relationships with colleagues or mentors without it feeling transactional or that you're using the other person? Like, how does that work? How do you approach that relationship without it feeling like, you know, I'm just asking this person because I need this thing? You know, how does that work for you all? And whoever wants to start on that one.
I think one thing, I actually was talking about this with a group of students the other day. It's the more that we can focus on building positive relationships, and I think everybody was also kind of sharing some of this with the mentorship question too, is, you know, you have these people that you already have now that know you well, really know your character, can kind of attest to your contributions and what you can do and your strengths that you can turn to for feedback. you want to hold on to those people as well as you want to build onto that type of core set of people. And so the more that you continuously do that over time and just make it a goal for yourself. I mean, one thing that I do is I kind of, and of course it's always more challenging right in the middle of a pandemic, but I used to always try and say, hey, I want to have at least 2 coffees a month with people that I'm not, currently working with or seeing on a regular basis, and set these goals for yourself. I know when I spoke to the Park Scholars, I got to know a couple of them that were alums, and one of them talked about how while they were at NC State, he and a couple other students would meet this chemistry professor that they really liked and was kind of their mentor at State for coffee every Friday or every other Friday. And 10 years later, they're still doing it. I mean, luckily they're still in the area, so they can. But again, I mean, you can keep these relationships, even if you move across country and you happen upon an interesting article or see something interesting, flip that person a note. You all are maybe hopefully getting on LinkedIn. If you're not, and LinkedIn's a great way at least to, to connect with people and send them little notes on LinkedIn, or as much as, you're still connected with them. So make that effort. And then when you need something, it's a little less awkward. At the same time, help them too, and you're adding value to them, and kind of putting that outreach to them as well makes it feel more and be more of a two-way type of scenario.
Anyone else care to comment on that?
I could comment on this. This is kind of general career advice too, but it applies to asking for recommendations. Is be your own advocate. If you already have a relationship with a professor or supervisor at an internship or your job, counselor, whoever, you don't know until you ask. And the worst case scenario is they're going to say, I'm not comfortable writing this recommendation because I don't know if I know you well enough. But I've never heard of that happening. So you just don't know until you ask. So I think that you just have to put yourself out there, even though it's uncomfortable. But the more you do it, the more that uncomfortableness goes away.
Absolutely. Just ask. Yeah.
I was gonna, and I know it's the same thing, but Caitlin, like you were saying, this is definitely me, and I always felt like I was a burden or bothering someone. But like you all said, you have that relationship. The worst thing they're gonna do is say no, and you're just right where you are. And someone gave me the advice one time, like instead of immediately going to the negative and thinking you're going to be the burden, what about thinking about it as like giving them the opportunity to do something like nice for you? And that will make them feel good as well. They helped you get the leg up. They helped you get your foot in the door. And then again, reiterating what you all said, like, add some of your value on the back end of that as well. I'm always happy to do something for you in the future as well. So just try to think positively about it.
It really is that.
So well.
Yeah, it is. I was just going to say, it really is that two-way relationship. I try to keep, networking, I feel like kind of almost has a negative connotation at this point, but I try to keep professional relationships super intentional. So if I see them mentioned in an article, I'll make sure and send it to them and say, hey, great job on this. We'll go back and forth, meet for coffees, all that. So when the time comes around that I need something or they need something, I feel comfortable asking, because there's a dynamic relationship that's not just super, super professionally strict, kind of how you would think of like a normal career mentor. It's really like a dynamic relationship. So.
Yes, I just really appreciate that, Susie, you saying that, because I think that any person, especially, well, not especially, I just say any person at any stage in your career can feel uncomfortable or as a burden if you're, leaning on other people in ways. And to flip that script a little bit is like a super powerful thing, because we're all designed to be social creatures working together in a community. We're not supposed to do this alone. So if that's true, then we know that other people should be ready and excited to help us, hopefully. And that's mutually beneficial. So thank you for mentioning that. Okay, so this is a great question that I am going to pull in, and I'll call on maybe Margaret and Caitlin if y'all are willing to answer this to start, and then anybody else is of course welcome to join in. How does one build up confidence to speak with employers? Like, what do you do to get yourself ready and confident to go out and seek those connections with employers?
So I think, that of course depends on what seat you're sitting in when you're speaking with said employers. But I think one thing that I've discussed this a lot with friends recently who are transitioning in jobs, and I think we all inherently like sell ourselves short of what our capabilities are because, oh, we don't know this technology, or, you know, there's like check marks of what you can and cannot do. But there are so many things as far as like soft skills go that we just have to recognize our worth and our value. So when you're speaking, like I think a tone of this call is right, like being authentic and really intentional about how you carry yourself. But like we all have such a wide range of like strengths, and something that I'm very interested in, and it has helped me drastically when like building out a team too, is the Enneagram, which is just like something that helps. It's like a test you can take, whatever, and it's ultimately like some scope of a personality test. But the reason that I bring that up is it talks about how all of our driving forces are so ranged and varied. And I think we all have such different strengths that like what you think is a throwaway, like, oh, everybody has this ability, is not true. Like you bring that to the table, and that is very unique. And the person sitting next to you really has a strength in another position or another space. And so like why or how do you build up the confidence is like it starts with you trust like, hey, I bring this value to the table, because I think we all do this. Like, I don't know what job I would apply for, because what can I really do? I've learned everything on the job. None of it is super technical. And so you write yourself off, but like start saying, no, this is, I show up and my character is important. I think that's like number one. If you're proud of who you are and you show up to the table, like that's the first step, is just like, okay, start having that conversation. So I know that's kind of like a long-winded response, and it really depends on like, is this an interview or how you're engaging with them, but trust yourself is the first thing.
I love what you said about confidence, Margaret. You have to be your own hype man. I don't know if this question is specific to you about to walk into an interview, but if you can't hype yourself up, then find your most outgoing, over the top family member or friend to hype you up beforehand, because you have not worked this hard and come this far to fumble when it comes to an interview because you're starting to doubt yourself. You have everything it takes. And like we've reiterated, you're going to learn everything you need to on the job. You basically are just displaying that you're a motivated individual that's ready to work hard, which is more than some of the coworkers that you probably will meet anyway. But yeah, be your own hype man. You got this.
Awesome. I know we thank you all for that. I totally agree. I love that sentiment, and that preparation is so important. Like we said earlier, if you got the interview, they want to know more about you as a person. So like that's what you got. You know, you're getting yourself hyped up. You're presenting, like Caitlin said, on who you are. That's awesome. So I totally agree. With respect to our time, I know we only have a couple minutes left. So, and I also recognize there's a couple questions that didn't get directly answered. But I want to encourage everybody to connect with our presenters. I'm sure our presenters are fine with connecting with you on LinkedIn, perhaps. Connect with them to follow up if you have other questions. If somebody said something that was super interesting to you and you really want to ask more questions, or whatever that might look like for you, try to connect with them and set yourself up for that. And then maybe if you all have any last piece of advice, I guess, for just anybody, or in general, any last piece of career advice for our students today, what would it be? And maybe just a couple sentences from each of you. If we could start with maybe Anna, would you be willing to kick us off?
Oh gosh, put me on the spot.
Yeah.
Be brave. Let go of all the doubts you have about yourself. Exactly like Caitlin said, I love that. Be your own hype man. I listen to loud music. I go in, I'm ready. And two, I think just like in life, all of us rely on and are relied upon for connection and networking and mentorship and all that stuff. And intentionality is kind of the foundation for that, especially in your career life. And I'm really, really excited for you guys. And I think it's going to be amazing. And wait, one last thing I will say too, though, is I have been told no sometimes, and it's not the worst thing in the world. I bet everyone on this call has not gotten the job that they thought that they wanted so much. You'll probably get told no, and it hurts, but just know that things happen the way they're meant to be. And looking back now, some of them have really been like huge bullets dodged. So trust the process, trust yourself, and just because you get a no once doesn't mean you're going to get a no every time. So that's it. And thank you all.
Anybody else want to leave some parting advice?
I'll just say give yourselves grace. I know there's a lot of pressure where you feel like the only thing going on in life is I need to graduate and get a job immediately, and that's just not true. You're going like 100 miles per hour in college, and then once you get to the workforce, it slows down a little bit. So there's no rush to get there. And also, I'm not on LinkedIn, but you can email me questions after this. I would love to connect. I still have my NCSU email, so you can find me on there. And I really have enjoyed this session.
Caitlin, would you be willing to drop your email in the chat?
Yes, I can do that now.
I think my last piece of advice is kind of two pieces. One is nothing's predetermined, and focus on being open. And let me just kind of share a little piece of what I mean by that. So predetermined, like I think going back to, you can always change course. I remember when I was in a leadership program for the first large company I was part of, I heard this gentleman speak that was an astronaut, and I'd always been fascinated about astronomy as a kid. And I walked up to him and I said, "Oh, I always want to be an astronaut." And he's like, "It's not too late. You actually look like one of my colleagues that's an astronaut from Canada," or something like that. He was telling me this whole story. It probably was a little too late to be an astronaut, but maybe not. But the point is like nothing's predetermined. You can always change course, and you want to be open. And being open, meaning being open to opportunities, being open to challenging yourself, but more importantly, be open to connect with people. And I think this is something I tell a lot of people is even in like the elevator, even in standing in the coffee shop, you never knew kind of who you're going to connect with and where that might lead for you, or what you might be able to give to them in terms of some value or advice. So the more that we sit in our own little world staring at our phone all the time when we're standing around, the less we are able to kind of make eye contact and just connect with people around you. So that's kind of my last piece of advice. Stay open.
Yeah, I love that so much, Kristen. And what I'll talk about is kind of, so I read this quote the other week, and I'll probably butcher it, but it was something like, life is hard for two reasons. Either you're staying in your comfort zone or you're not leaving it. And I think that like that note is so good to keep in mind. Like, we're all scared of things, but it's like, show up and do them anyways. And based on, that's kind of like to Kristen's point, like, you don't know what could happen after that. Like, you might identify that this is something I do really love. And, and so, sometimes it's taking baby steps, but just be aware of that. Don't stick to stuff that you've known just because you've known it. So that's all. And then, yes, everybody, please feel free to connect with me. I would love to talk to you all. I know my company is definitely hiring as well. I'm not like trying to make a shout out there, but if anybody wants any more information, I do have it.
Yeah, definitely connect LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Go get those jobs, people. All right. Well, thank you all so much for joining us today. I know it's right at 3, so I want to make sure y'all can get back to your main session. I dropped it in the chat. Please do go back to the main session starting now. And thank you all panelists so much for joining us today. This has been so much fun, and I'm really grateful for all of your expertise, especially from so many different backgrounds and career orientations that you're in. Extremely helpful. So thank you all for joining us very much.